Hello and welcome to Magical Women's YouTube channel. My name is Breland and today I'm going to show you how to do a single crochet. So to begin, we've already made our slip knot and we have chained 11. When you're working with single crochet, your extra chain, you'll add an extra chain to that number that you're going to do for however many stitches you want. So because I chained 11, I will have 10 stitches because my first chain from the hook will count as what will give me the height to work in the rest of the stitches to go from right to left. And this is very important. However, whatever your pattern calls for, the YouTube tutorial that you're following calls for, or wherever you're getting your pattern from, follow the chain number that they gave you, because they typically have included your turning chain for the project that you're working. So to get started, we are going to find our second chain from the hook. And I'm going to zoom this in for just a moment so that you can see. So this is our first chain where our yarn is coming out of, and this is our second chain here. So once you've found that, we're going to insert our hook or poke our hook into that stitch there, like that. Now, I always poke in the back loop. There are actually 3 loops, so you have your front, your middle, and your back. I always poke in the loop furthest away from me, and I typically turn my chain on its side like this, so it's actually the top loop for me. But if you were working like this, the one in the back here would be your loop. This would be your front where my thumb is. So we've inserted our hook. We're going to yarn over. To yarn over, we'll bring our hook from the back to the front. And we're going to draw up a loop. To do that, we're going to pull through that first loop right here. Now this is our working yarn, which means it's connected to our big ball of yarn, so we're not going to worry about that. We're only going to focus on the loops that are already there. When we yarn over, I don't count that as a loop. So we're going to pull this loop, this piece of yarn, through this loop. And that's how we draw up a loop. So we've drawn up a loop. So now we have 2 loops on our hook. We're going to yarn over again, bringing from the back to the front. Grab. Now make sure your hook is facing up so that you don't drop any stitches. You'll pull your yarn to the end, let your hook catch that working yarn. Turn your hook and pull it through those 2 loops. And then pull your hook back up to face up. We're going to do that again together. Slower. So here's your next chain. Now the best way I have found to find your next chain is if you can kind of stick your finger in there and feel your finger in the chain that you worked in, and it has extra loops in it, you've already done a stitch there. So we're going to go into the next one, and we're going to poke in that back loop right there. So we poked our hook in, or inserted our hook. We're going to turn our hook back up, and we're going to yarn over so bring our yarn from the back to the front. Grab your work. This is our work. Our chain is our work right now, and we're going to pull it to the end of our hook. Let it catch, and we're going to pull through that first loop. And then poke our hook back out. So now we have 2 loops on our hook, and we're going to yarn over again. Just like that, and we're going to pull through those 2 loops. Just like that. So now we're going to do another one, but I'm going to zoom back out so you can see my hands a little more. And we're going to go into our next stitch together. Now, when I am working with, anytime I yarn over, or when I'm about to, because I want to keep my tension the same, I'm going to pinch my working yarn between my pointer finger and my middle finger on my right hand. That's just a habit I've developed, and I try to maintain doing that so that I always have even stitches. That's what, if your tension is loose, your stitches will not be even. If your tension is too tight versus too loose, they'll be harder to work in. So tighter is hard and loose is easier, but it's not going to look as uniform or as pretty as you might want it to. So we're going to go into our next stitch, our next chain here. We're just going to poke our hook in there. Then we're going to yarn over. Now when I yarn over, I typically put it between my pointer finger and my middle finger on my left hand. And then when I pinch, I typically pinch using these 3 fingers here, and I just grab it like a claw. And we're going to pull through the first loop and draw up a loop, just like that. And then we're going to yarn over again, and we're going to pull through these 2 here, just like that. So we're going to go to the end of the row, and I'm just going to continue in a slower pace than I would normally crochet, and we'll just do this together. If you need to rewind, please feel free to do that. Also, to slow it down, you can use the little ellipses in the top right hand corner to slow down the video so that you can see everything a little bit more in slow motion or at the pace that you feel comfortable at. Now, you see how it's kind of curling up there? My tension tends to be tighter for my chains in the first 2 rows of anything that I crochet. To fix that, I just kind of pull on it. And it works out fine. I just have a tendency to be more of a tight crocheter. And so I just fix that by pulling down on that. It has a tendency to get in the way. Alright, we are at our last stitch. This is our last stitch. This is also where our slip stitch was, or slip knot, I should say. Alright, so we just did our last single crochet, and now we need to go the other direction. So I'm going to zoom back in for a moment. So we're going to chain 1. And we're going to turn our work. Now, chain 1 is very important to give us the height that we need for the next row. Now I want you to, I'm going to take my hook out for a minute. I want you to observe something. So remember how in the chain we had 3 loops? Well, now we have 2. We have the front, which is the one closest to you, and the back. Now there is a 3rd loop in there, but I have never had a pattern tell me to work in the 3rd loop, so I'm not going to cover it in this video. Because typically, with a single crochet, like most of your basic stitches and advanced stitches, or multiple stitches, you will work in either the front loop, or the back loop, or both. Now, if your pattern does not say, the rule of thumb is to always go in both. And to find both, you're going to find both the loops, and I kind of poke my finger in there sometimes if I'm having trouble finding it. Kind of feel for my other finger on the other side, and that's where you're going to go. We're going to go in that little hole right there. Now, if your pattern says to count your turning chains as a stitch, you will skip this first one and go into this next one. However, we're not following a pattern, we're just practicing our stitches. So we're going to go into this first stitch, and we're going to poke our hook into both of them. So it'll look like 2 loops, but we're going to count it as 1. Alright, then we're going to yarn over and draw up a loop, just like that, like we have been, and then yarn over again and pull through 2. Just like that. We're just going to keep going. So you'll poke in the center of your stitch, draw up a loop, yarn over, and pull through 2. Now, the way I'll hold my hook and the way I hold my yarn may not be the way you hold your hook or your yarn. The thing you want to make sure is that you're keeping your stitches the same. To make sure you're keeping your stitches the same, make sure that this loop is not super far away from your work. Another way to make sure your stitches are the same is to make sure that this space from where your ball of yarn is to where you're wrapping it around is also taut. Not tight, not loose, just taut. You want it tight enough that there's some resistance, but not too tight. That way, all your stitches look the same. So we're just going to keep going. Until we get to the end of the row. And I'm going to zoom back out for you so you can see more of what I'm doing with my fingers. And when we get to the end of the row, I want to show you something. Now, because of how I hold my yarn, when I first insert, see how my yarn's being held between my pointer finger and my middle finger on my left hand? Because of how I'm holding my yarn, I've already yarned over because I've kind of pulled on this yarn to create that tension, that tightness. So I've already yarned over. But you'll develop your own way of doing things. All right. Now, this is very important. And I'm going to take my hook out so its shininess is not distracting us. All right. So, how to know if it's your last stitch? Because you want your edges to be straight. This is your edge. This is also an edge. Now, we want them to be straight. So the way to do that is we're going to make sure we go in our last stitch. This little nub right here is our chain from when we first did our chain. That's our 11th chain that we did. The 2 loops right here, right there, is our last stitch. Here's the rule of thumb. If your turning chain does not count as a stitch, then you will always work into 2 loops, like we just did. That was our last single crochet for this row. There are no more loops that have, no more stitches that have 2 loops. There is another loop, but it's not our last one. That's our chain. And if we go into that and do a stitch, we're going to add a stitch to our overall project. So, I'm going to hold this a little differently. Both our sides are the same. That means we have 10 stitches. You see the 2 loops on top? You see the nub down here? That's our chain. This is our stitch. That's our last stitch if we were to turn our work and go in this direction. Over here, we haven't chained one, but if we did, this would be our first stitch because it has the 2 loops. All right, well, thank you so much for tuning in and watching. I hope you've enjoyed this and you found this helpful. Please feel free to like, subscribe, and leave me some feedback in the comments. I appreciate your feedback. Well, my name is Breland, and I hope you have a magical day.